Thank you guys all for coming. I'm really excited, actually. Seems to be a lot of content around governance and a lot of interest in data governance and data quality at this conference, which I think is something that's really important in what we do, and I know something that I take very seriously at work. So a little bit about myself. I'm currently a digital analytics solutions architect, but I'm also heavily involved from that role in data governance, data quality efforts in our enterprise. I'm also the VP of Online Services for DAMA International. If you're not familiar with DAMA International, we are a nonprofit professional association for information professionals. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, so I'll plug them a little bit. I'm a data geek, first and foremost, recovering developer, fell in love with data and organizing things, and been in digital strategy for pretty much my entire career, and probably every facet of it. Digital media analytics, customer information strategy, and visualization is all stuff that I've done in the past. Did a lot of work with digital strategy and customer management, customer information management in the nonprofit space, which was really interesting work. I'm on the board of directors of DAMA, and I live with 5 children. I have 3 of my own, and my girlfriend has 2. So when I'm not doing data geek stuff, I'm wrestling kids. So just a little bit about DAMA. You can check us out, dama.org. So the vision of our organization is to support an empowered global community of information professionals. All right, we have the Data Management Body of Knowledge, which is a publication. There should be a new version coming out at some point soon, but the DIMBOK one is out there. And if you're in data management, data governance, any role really within data, it's definitely worth keeping on your desk as a reference. Mine keeps getting stolen, so it must be pretty good. We also have the CDMP professional certification, so the Certified Data Management Professional. And so I'm involved in that project, do a lot of proctoring exams and things like that. And so yeah, that's DAMA. Sorry if I seem surprised by a slide or some of the content there. I did have to shuffle this around a little bit up until a couple hours ago. So I may talk about things that aren't up there, just kind of go with it. And I might actually be like, whoa, I didn't know I put that up there either. So disclaimer, the content in this presentation is not endorsed by DAMA. I don't want to get myself into trouble by saying something that the entire profession doesn't accept or agree with. Okay, so those of us in analytics right now, that's going to distract me. Those of us in analytics we're kind of the cool kids right now, right? There's a lot going on. I see a lot of increased demand. Some of this trending is on some of the projects I've been working on. We're having 100% increase in events volume year over year. We have lots of new invest projects going on, lots of things being tagged. Lots of different people are starting to tag pretty much everything and trying to use the data. It's really good. It's awesome. We're in demand. People want us to provide good insights. But the only way with this growth that we can be successful is to have good governance in place. Because without it, we don't have any real, we lack some confidence in our insights, right? So common challenges that I've seen, and these are just a few of them. I'm sure you guys have plenty yourselves. Resources, okay? Most digital analytics teams that I've seen are relatively small. Handful of people. I'm part of a slightly larger one, but still, small shops, not a lot of money, not a lot of people, and this is all still kind of new, so finding the right people to join your team is difficult, right? Scope. What is this? This could be very vague. What does scope mean? So the scope of the projects. What are we tagging? Okay. What information are we collecting? Is it just online? Is it online and offline? Are we doing data integration? What are our sources? Sometimes, our scope sort of doesn't really match our resources or budgets. But we have to try and meet business demand. So increasing demand and interest from service recipients, again, good challenge, but this is something that we're seeing consistently. Standards or lack thereof. Naming standards. Definition standards. Implementation standards, right? This is all stuff that, in my experience, we're sort of learning as we go and trying to, document it, refine it, improve it. Engagement. Everybody wants what we have, but they don't really want to know what we do, right? They don't want to know the intricacies of it. Business isn't always engaged in what we do unless something's wrong, unless they don't get that report, or there's a huge variance, or they don't trust the data. Then they become very interested. But that initial engagement, getting the buy-in and interest from the onset of a project is a challenge. Fear. How many of you guys have to deal with information privacy people? Okay, right? It's kind of a scary world out there, and the fear is well-founded. There's lots of uncertainty. We're always afraid of a data breach. We're worried about PMI and PCI and PMI and all the other I's. There's probably, there's more I's that I'm not even talking about. But again, it's something we have to battle because the fear is useful. The fear mitigates risk to the business, but sometimes it can be a little bit overboard, right? We could spend too much time worrying about things that we don't necessarily need to be worried about. Okay, so where does digital analytics fit into your organization? I've seen a lot of different scenarios, okay? Is this gonna work? Maybe, behind the back. There we go. So digital services. Some teams are set up as a single team, single shop that services the entire enterprise. Again, that requires a bit more. It's kind of a tricky scenario in that you need the resources to be able to service the entire enterprise, and you also need subject matter experts, right, within a single team that you can apply to each line of business or each customer. This is not, hold on. We'll do it this way. Okay, marketing. Could be embedded in a marketing team. Could just be a marketing team. Could be just a small company where you do marketing and this is part of your job as a marketer. Big data. Okay, we're heading more and more and more towards big data. You hear it all the time. I go to data conferences a lot. Everybody talks about big data. Nobody really knows what it means, but everybody kind of talks about it, right? And lots of companies have big data initiatives, and digital analytics in certain cases is part of a big data initiative that we're feeding clickstream data and doing all sorts of data integration in these very large data sets. All right, I give up. IT, in certain cases, it's a function of IT. It could be similar to a digital services model. This could just be another team of geeks in the IT department that go out and tag things for the business. The business itself. this is really cool. If you have the digital analytics team embedded in the business, okay, you have a better chance of having very clear outcomes, goals, and objectives, and you have easy access to the experts that can help you deliver on those, right? So that's another sort of configuration that we see. So I was on the plane here, and like I said, I was sort of working on this because of some stuff that came up, and I was talking to one of my friends overseas, and she's very renowned in data in the data world, and so her quote was, and I told her I had to quote her. I didn't want to use her name because but any ask can create output. It takes someone who knows the business to judge the values of the results. Now think about that. I, as someone who works in analytics, right? I can analyze data, I can look at data, I can manipulate data, I can move it around, I can make it do whatever I need to do, but I can't validate outcomes. I can't validate the quality of that data if I'm not an expert in what I'm trying to report on, right? So without involvement, engagement, participation, expertise of the business, what we do is kind of meaningless, right? I don't mean to like offend anybody, but it's true. You need that piece of the puzzle. So in other words, you can only harness the power of analytics if you have clear objectives, right? Business gives us those clear objectives. Did I turn this off or something? I don't know what I did. Okay. Business should be driving analytics efforts and active in validating the outcomes. It shouldn't be business just gives us the requirements, we go implement, we say, oh, the data looks like it's passing through pretty good, build a report, give it to them, and say we're done. Right? They need to be very active throughout the process so that we can ensure the integrity of the data that we're giving them. It's important to engage in, I'm being sort of redundant here, but it's important to engage and educate the business, not only in our capabilities, but our overall governance processes that we're going to be putting into place. Governance is critical to promoting understanding to the business, right? When you have those boundaries, when you have that governance, when you have the processes in place, it's much easier to articulate and for people to understand what you're trying to do and the mechanisms for accomplishing your goals. And communication is key to the practice of data governance. That's really ultimately the keystone. Data governance is not about saying no or saying, let me think about this, or you can't do this, or you can't do this, or we shouldn't do this. It's about communication, setting expectations, making sure that processes are in place that are efficient to ensure the overall quality and security of our data. So, haters gonna hate, play is gonna govern. So, what is it like to implement data governance for your analytics team? First, let's talk about what is data governance. It's kind of, again, it's one of those broad terms, right? And it sort of, some people refer to data governance as, interchangeably with data quality, or data architecture, or information architecture. Data governance, the definition we use at DAMA, for now, is the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making, planning, monitoring, and enforcement over the management of data assets. Okay? Data governance is the centerpiece of an overall data strategy. Okay? So data governance works with data architecture. Data governance supports data quality efforts. Data governance supports data privacy efforts. Okay? So it's sort of the overall macro level piece to your data strategy. It is the foundation of all data management functions. And data governance is disruptive. If you're not doing this yet, and you go into work on Monday and say, I saw this fat guy with a red beard talk about data governance, and now we're going to do this. Some heads are going to turn, and you're going to get pushback. And once you start implementing some of these policies, you're going to get pushback. To me, having been in governance for a while, that's a good sign. It's a sign of change. And you need to communicate your way through it. I'm going to have to speed up. That timer is very intimidating. Okay, so why your analytics team needs data governance. Your data will look like that as it grows. It will be chaos, and I hate wires. Cash, there's a monetary piece to this, right? Not having efficient data, an efficient data set burdens your systems, right? It wastes man hours on having to research and validate and all other stuff. And at the end of the day, if your insights are wrong, that could have a negative financial impact on the enterprise. And compliance, the law, which is something that you're going to hear a lot about today. I'm sure you've heard a lot already. But this is a growing concern and something that everybody needs to be aware of. So at the end of the day, if you're not practicing good governance and analytics, you're losing a lot of money. You're putting the enterprise at risk in pretty much every measure of risk that a company could have. You're giving your competitors an advantage, because if they have better data, they win. You're likely missing out on great insight, and you have grumpy employees that have to sort through the mess of data that you have. So compliance. This could be a whole day unto itself, so I'm just going to touch on it. But in the EU and elsewhere, privacy. So EU privacy laws and elsewhere in the world they're not based on digital. They're not based on computer data, personal information, right? The EU privacy laws are based on privacy as a fundamental human right. Okay, so when violating these laws is basically a human rights violation. It's not a IT process, non-compliance, financial, whatever. It's a human rights violation. Here in the US, we have lots of different laws that overlap, vary state by state, and we have lots of regulators. So it makes things very, very, very unclear at times. So a few points. If you have customers and you market to people in the EU, you need to understand how that impacts your customer data. You need to be more diligent if you're marketing to people in the EU on what data you're collecting. You need to know what data you're collecting. You need to know where it is, because you have to be compliant, right? Safe harbor is gone. The world is changing right now, and whether you know it or not, there's a significant amount of risk coming. And so just keep that in mind. Wow, that was a really bad transition, okay. So all US companies should be cautious of potential re-identification risk. Do you guys all know what de-identification is? And do we all know what re-identification is? If you don't, it's okay, I can go over it, okay. So re-identification is we're taking anonymized data that we say, we can't, it's not identifiable, we can't tell who it is. And then somewhere along the line through your analytics process, you mix it with another data set. And then it magically now tells a story about somebody. And we'll look at one of those cases. But re-identification risk is potentially a breach of the Gramm-Leach-Lilly Act and the EU privacy rules. And familiarize yourself with the FTC Act and other regulations, particularly Section 5 of the FTC Act. Because how many of you guys, every single time you tag a new part of your site, check your privacy policy and update it? That's what I thought. You could be at risk. You could be in non-compliance if your privacy policy doesn't match up what you're tagging. So at the end of the day, when you're talking about governance and privacy, ethics is the most important piece to this, right? Lawyers are going to give you a checklist of things you can and can't do. Business is going to give you, the requirements. Information privacy people are going to tell you what you can and can't collect and what you can do with it. But at the end of the day, if you follow good ethical practice and put your customers first and treat your customers as people instead of data points, you're probably going to be okay. And this actually came up this morning in the panel. Creepy. Don't be creepy. So ethical data governance and analytics is a fundamental safeguard to protect your organization's reputation, your customers' privacy, and ensure compliance. All right. I'm fairly certain with a certain degree of confidence that if you take an ethical approach when you're implementing an analytics strategy, that you will be in compliance with laws and regulatory bodies and internal policies and whatever else is on your plate. So I think you've probably heard most of these stories, and some of them I've actually heard, and you'll probably hear again today. Netflix ratings and AOL data. These are two examples of re-identification. So Netflix gave out a data set that was anonymized of all their ratings, okay, of the 5-star ratings of the movies. And somewhere along the line, it was part of a contest, it got mixed in with some IMDb data and other things, and all of a sudden, you could start telling who rated what movie what. That would be embarrassing for me in certain situations, so I could understand the concern around that. Similarly with AOL, they released search data that was anonymized with a unique identifier attached to it. Now, by itself, that's fine, right? The issue is, and what they didn't take into consideration was, people search for things like their name or where they live. So now you have a unique identifier tied to what you're searching, and voila, Tony is, ID 10087 is looking for restaurants in Hartford, Connecticut, and then he Googled his name. So anonymous isn't necessarily anonymous. Just keep that in mind. You want to be aware of re-identification risk. You want to always be thinking about re-identification risk when you're integrating data from multiple sources. And again, two data sets, anonymized data, and outside public data is a high risk for re-identification. This is the popular one, the Target knows your daughter is pregnant story, right? Daughter gets knocked up, okay? Dad has a Target card, has a loyalty customer card. She goes online, starts pricing out, what is this thing gonna cost me? How much do diapers cost? How much does formula cost? Target's got some really, really good data, starts sending out flyers and things and coupons for diapers and baby formula. Not really how you want to find out your teenage daughter's pregnant, right? So while this, again, may not be any legal violation, and depending on your definition or your tolerance, it may not be creepy, it ended up upsetting a customer, and actually upsetting a lot of customers, right? So in that sense, we shouldn't be the ones to define what's creepy and what's not, right? We need to understand our customers. That's what we're doing anyway. If we understand what our customers think is creepy, and we put them first, we put our customer's perspective first in defining our ethical boundaries in analytics, we're going to be fine, because you don't want pissed off customers. And then there's, how many of you guys have heard of the Facebook's emotional contagion? Okay, this was interesting because I could understand the concern, but I was also like, that's really cool. Really, really cool. So what Facebook was doing is they were trying to, this idea of emotional contagion. So if people read a lot of positive posts in their feed, would their post be more positive? And so they sampled thousands of people and started testing this. They wanted to see if a feed is more positive, does it reduce the amount of negative posts for individuals? Well, again, really cool, right? But is it ethical to try and influence how people feel? Is it okay to try and make Tony have a better day by only showing things on his newsfeed? I don't necessarily know the answer to that. My thought is it makes me a little uncomfortable. That's a lot of power, isn't it? So again, that creep people out. Facebook doesn't care so much about creeping people out. They tend to push the limits all the time, which is fine, and step back. But from a customer retention, from a good business practice standpoint, you always want to keep your customer first. Your customer is a human being, not a piece of data. And ultimately, at the end of the day, bad PR and lost customers can be more expensive than regulatory fines, which is why, in my opinion, ethics is paramount to compliance. So 11 minutes, all right. I want to leave some QA at the time. So protect your customer's reputation and your bottom line. Data quality, you want to have good naming standards in place, descriptive naming standards so you know what data elements are, like state. Okay, what does state mean? Is it the state of something? Is it a state in the US? Is it the mailing address state? Is it the state where they purchased a product? Is it the state where they're traveling to? Be descriptive as to what your data is so that it can be used appropriately and people are confident with your output. Definitions. Okay, I've been doing a lot of this, going through and really working on your data definitions. Understanding what data is so that when I'm gone, I'm on to the next project, the next job, I get hit by a bus, the next person can come in and know what this data is. Lineage. This is something we don't always think about, is it? What is our data's life cycle? Where did we get it? What's its value? Where does it go? Does it mature? Does it have application elsewhere? Not something we typically think about because we're kind of fast and furious in this world right now. But data lineage, data maturity is very important. It's something that we need to get on our radar. Classify your data. Data classification, and this is the point I wanted to make. Data classification extends to information, right? We classify our data as personally identifiable, okay? That classification extends to information on a report. You need to keep that in mind because whether or not something can be stored somewhere, right, based on if it's personal information or not, once it's on a report, that information isn't declassified. It isn't now not personal information. It's still personal information. So keep in mind that data classification lends to information classification. Vendors, contractors, and partners. So I'm going to just go, okay, quickly. Oversight. Trust their controls that they have in place, but verify them, especially vendors that have access to granular data. In your contracts, include an audit clause and a habeas data clause. The habeas data clause means you get your data back when they're done. Use business associates agreements, BAAs, with external partners if you deal with HIPAA information. Standard practice, important though. So plan, have a clear purpose and objectives whenever you start to tag something, whenever you are going to start analyzing data. Again, can't stress this enough, engage the business. If your business customer, your subject matter expert, is not involved in this process, whether it's naming the data in a manner that they understand it or validating the results in a report, it really is a futile effort. You're going to have lots of failures. Implement and refine processes. So start something and keep working it till it gets better. And finally, and not to be scary, but have a data breach plan as part of your strategy. It will happen. Okay? It will happen. So make sure you have a documented data breach plan in place. So when it does happen, you can say, don't worry guys, we got this. And you look like a hero instead of fire drill and people yelling at you. And I've made this point already, but review and update your privacy policy every time you make changes to make sure you're disclosing exactly what you're collecting and exactly what you're doing with it. Again, Section 5 of the FTC Act. All right, so implementing a data governance strategy, patience, persistence, passion. You need someone who can communicate, someone who is passionate about this, someone who is persistent, and someone who is extremely patient. So find a leader. Implement a data governance committee. Have that committee review all new data elements that are being added into your systems. Because now you have a control in place, you have a mechanism for applying naming standards, for classifying data, for definitions and business cases, so that we have a better understanding of the data that's in our systems, and we can better serve the people that are consuming our reports. Vendor controls and oversight. Have a very thorough statement of work that outlines all your processes, including your new data governance processes, and hold your vendors accountable to that. Get active if you guys have enterprise level data governance or data stewards, data quality efforts. Have someone on your team actually engage with that central data team and be a part-time data steward. Leverage enterprise tools that exist in that area whenever possible, or use the tools you have. Reason we're here. Write Telium extensions to do de-identification. You know, there's lots of things that we can do with the tools we have. This doesn't have to be, this crazy new effort that we need funding for. Let's see, I skipped over a couple. We talked about all those already. Data quality standards and processes, yeah, we got all that. Then eventually, evolve into something more formal, metadata or repository, data profiling, data maturity, automation. And this is an interesting one, and I hadn't actually thought of it, but one of my friends he's a privacy guy in Ireland, he said, we should start floating this idea of an ethics review board, right? Because ethics is important to me in this context, and this is something that's existed in the medical and pharmaceutical industry for a long time. An ethics review board could be outside of your governance committee, right? And but support your committee in keeping you in check by enforcing ethical standards. Thanks, guys.